Mr. Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, Texas taxpayers deserve a property tax system that's fair, consistent, and accountable, regardless of where they live. This bill ensures that fairness by requiring annual reappraisals in large counties with elected appraisal boards, something most of your districts already do.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr.
would
Guerin,
the gentleman
for what
yield for a
purpose?
question?
Does the gentleman yield for questions?
Yes, I do.
He yields for questions.
Mr. Turner, are you aware that there are 18 school districts in Tarrant County?
I am.
And of those 18, only 4 are in compliance with the comptroller's value study because we haven't appraised for the last 2 years and won't be appraising again for another year?
That's correct, that multiple districts in our county are basically failing the property value study as a result.
Are you aware that I represent a district that has hired a bankruptcy attorney if we don't make that change?
I am. I believe that's the Castleberry Independent School District.
It is, Mr. Turner. I mean, your bill's a really good bill. We just happen to have we have an appraisal board that has decided not to appraise but every 3 years. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
And it is state law. I'm not mistaken, but state law requires all properties to be appraised at fair market value on January 1st of each year. Is that not correct?
Yes, sir. Title 1 of the Property Tax Code, Section 23.01, says, except as otherwise provided by this chapter, all taxable property is appraised as market value as of January 1st.
Mr. Turner, thank you for bringing this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Guerin. I appreciate you being a joint author on this bill. And I'm going to make a couple other points. If you represent one of the more than 200 counties in this state with fewer than 75,000 residents, this bill does not apply to your county. You are bracketed out of this bill. And if you represent one of the 50 counties with populations of 75,000 or more, your appraisal district is very most likely already doing this because this is best practice. It is state law, as Mr. Guerin just pointed out. Most districts are already doing this. There's just a couple of inconsistencies we're trying to address with this bill.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Little, for what purpose?
does the gentleman yield for questions?
Does the gentleman yield for questions?
I'd be happy to yield for
He
questions.
yields for questions.
Chairman Turner, my understanding is that your bill has been brought in response to action taken by the Tarrant Appraisal District's Board of Directors that were recently, at least in part, elected. Isn't that right?
Well, my bill has been brought in response to concerns I have heard from my school districts in Tarrant County, the ones I represent, that the actions of the appraisal district are in fact threatening their state funding because of the property value study implications that we just discussed with Mr. Guerin.
Chairman Turner, that may be a little bit complicated for certain people in the room or back home in Tarrant County. My understanding is that in response to rapidly climbing property values, particularly on homeowners, the Tarrant Appraisal District Board of Directors has decided to reappraise properties that are homesteads every third year instead of every single year. And it sounds to me like the complaint of the school districts is they are not growing the tax base fast enough on the backs of the homeowners in Tarrant County in order to fund their school districts. Isn't that right?
No. I think that represents a misunderstanding of how the appraisal system works, Mr. Little, respectfully. The appraisal district, the job of the appraisal district under Texas law is to appraise property at its market value. That's what it clearly says in the tax code. It is the job of the taxing jurisdiction, so that is the school district, that is the city, the county, in cases where there's a hospital district, a community college district, a special purpose district, other types of districts, as well as, I would add, the Texas legislature, because of our role in school finance. It is those policymakers' job, those elected policymakers' jobs, to determine tax rates. It is not the job of the appraisal district to do that. And they determine the tax rates. The tax assessor collector then sends out the tax notices. That is our somewhat bifurcated system of how we do property taxes in the state of Texas.
Representative Turner, I'm familiar with the system. I've done property tax litigation over 20 years. I'm
I
familiar
wasn't suggesting you're not.
That's okay. My point is that Tarrant Appraisal District, once they began electing in part their board of directors, decided to reappraise homestead or residential property every third year. This seems to me to be a greatly commendable and important improvement for the people of Texas so that their values are not rapidly climbing as they are everywhere else besides Tarrant Appraisal District. I wonder whether you would accept an amendment to codify in statute that we would reappraise homestead property or residential property across the state every third year?
No, I think that would be contrary to the intent of my bill. What I would point you to, Mr. Little, is data from the Comptroller's office shows that appraised value in multiple counties, including Tarrant County, incidentally, is actually declined from 2023 to 2024. And so when you have a reappraisal plan that does not appraise every year, what you are in fact doing in a down market, which some counties are in, is you are locking homeowners and business owners, for that matter, into a higher appraisal and therefore higher taxes than what they should be paying. And so it is, out of fairness to the taxpayers, we should want the appraisal to be correct so they're not overpaying their taxes, and so their schools aren't being short funded on the other end.
Representative Turner, it seems to me that certain board members were elected to the board of Tarrant Appraisal District and decided on a path to reappraise residential property every third year, and the purpose of this bill is to override them. Isn't that right?
I think you represented the facts well. I think that this policy changed after there were some new members elected to the Appraisal District Board. That is true. I think that the actions of the Appraisal District Board, as Mr. Guerin laid out, are inconsistent with existing state law that says all property shall be appraised to its market value as of January 1st each year. There's an inconsistency in the statute. This bill is simply trying to clear up that inconsistency. It is unfair. You represent Denton County, I believe. Is that right, Mr. Little?
That's correct, Representative.
So I would suggest to you, Mr. Little, it is unfair to your constituents to have a policy like this in effect in Tarrant County. Because what happens is when the appraised value declines artificially, I would add, there is a time. Some school districts will fail the property value study, as we discussed. There's a time period before they fail the property value study where they're collecting less revenue at the local level, and the school finance formulas say that the state will backfill that money. So that is your constituents, Mr. Little, backfilling the shortfall in Tarrant County. How is that fair to your constituents? So I would think you would support this bill.
Representative Turner, I understand very well the point that you're making. The point that I want our members and the people in Tarrant County to understand is that if we pass this bill, we will be increasing, by definition, the property tax obligations of every homeowner in the county, almost certainly. And while I understand and appreciate your point about Denton County, I wish Denton County's board of directors at their appraisal district would do the exact same thing Tarrant's did and reappraise every third year. I wish it were the law statewide. I am concerned about what your bill is doing, and I will simply say that I commend the efforts of Tarrant Appraisal District to prevent the rapid onset and rise of property values in that county.
Okay. Well, I would just say that the appraisal process does not determine tax rates. Tax rates are determined by the elected officials in the taxing jurisdiction. Once again, that's the school district, the city, the county, and other special districts, and the state legislature through school finance formulas. Appraisal districts simply do not have a role in that process, so it is unfair to expect of appraisal district board members that they have some obligation to try to go in and affect people's property tax rates, because that is not in their statutory job definition. It is unfair to put that pressure on them. So with this bill, we're going to take any ambiguity away and take that pressure off of them and put it back where it belongs, which is on the local elected officials in the school board, the city council, the county commissioners court, and yes, and the state legislature.
Thank you, Representative Turner.
Thank you, Representative Little.
Mr. Pursuit, for what purpose?
The gentleman yield for some questions.
Gentleman yield for questions.
Yes.
Yields for questions.
Thank you, Representative. As I understand it, the property value study, in order to have an impact on funding, a school district's appraised properties have to be out of line for is it 2 years or 3 years? They have to fail 2 or 3 in a row?
Yeah, that's right. It's a couple cycles. It depends on how much they're out of alignment. So I believe if it's 5 to 10%, then there's a grace period of a couple of years. But if it's more than 10%, even in the first year, then that's an automatic. You're automatically going to lose state funding, and that's the situation in one of the school districts Mr. Guerin represents that he was just speaking about. They fell out of alignment on the property value study in year one, and that's why they're facing a budget shortfall of several $1 million. And tragically looking at bankruptcy as a result.
You know, I've struggled with this bill. If you don't reappraise every year, it seems to me what will happen is you're going, rather than having kind of a slight uptick over time as appraised values go up, you'll have very large increases, a plateau, very large increase, and a plateau. Am I thinking about that right?
Well, you are. It creates a real sticker shock effect because you might be flat for a couple of years and then you might have a big increase. But conversely, in a down market, you could be appraised at a higher value than what your property is really worth and therefore paying higher taxes. So if this policy were in effect, in every other year or every 3-year appraisal back in 2009, 2010, 2011, when our real estate market was declining, you would have homeowners and business owners paying more taxes than they should because they're being appraised at a much higher value than what their property could sell for in that declining market.
Right, and basically what you're saying is because you're not capturing the market shifts every year, if it's timed incorrectly, you actually may be flat on a year when it should have gone down. Is that right?
That's exactly right.
Okay. You know, what I struggle with is with Representative Little's point, which I think is fair, which is that an elected board of directors, in part, made this decision. And when I look at Section 2518 of the tax code, which is not amended by your bill, but is referenced, and that's really what your bill's getting at, you know, the law already calls for in 2518B that the plan that the appraisal board adopts should provide or shall provide for the following reappraisal activities for all real and personal property in the district at least once every 3 years. And so it seemed to me that what the board looked at was it had authority to go every 3 years with a reappraisal, and that partially elected board thought that was the better public policy for Tarrant County, I guess, in their mind. I mean, is that a fair analysis?
I think that is a very fair analysis, and that's what my bill gets to the heart of. We're trying to address this inconsistency between the part of the code that you just referenced, because that's exactly what it says, and the part of the code I referenced earlier with Mr. Guerin, which is, I don't want to misstate it, Section 23.01 of the tax code that says all taxable property is appraised as market value as of January 1st. Those can be construed to be inconsistent, right. And that's the problem we're trying to solve for here.
Well, I don't know what I'm going to do on your bill, but I appreciate you answering those questions, and I just want to make sure we understood the full lay of the land. Thank you, sir.
I appreciate it, Representative Basu. I believe there's some...
Mr. Speaker,
Now, for what purpose?
if the gentleman would yield for a few questions.
Gentlemen yield for questions?
Of course,
Mr.
Yield for
Turner, do you own a
questions.
home?
I do.
Have you ever seen your property taxes go down?
Yes, I have.
Okay, by what extent?
I don't know. When we passed the property tax relief 2 years ago, I saw a substantial
really-
increase,
it was-
about $1,300 on average. And
Okay. And since that relief, have you seen your property taxes go down again?
no,
And that's because every year that they appraise, they always go up. And so I just want to I believe what your tax appraisal board does is laudable, because I'll tell you that every time they appraise my property, your property, there's a new appraisal. I've never seen, other than relief given by this body, I've never seen property taxes go down. And so in addition to that, by what they're doing is also giving the taxpayer a break, saying, you know what, you don't have to come and protest your property taxes. So under this notion, I understand what you're trying to do. You're trying to marry the incongruencies. But I would say that now, if you're right, and this passes, the taxpayer has to now go protest every single year. Is that correct?
no, and I disagree with your premise, Mr. Canales. I've had appraisals that have declined year on year. Again, I'll reference 2008 to 2011. That was a down market. Property values declined in that time period across the state, across the country, across the world. Okay, and so it makes no sense to lock someone into a higher property value when markets are declining. So that's the first thing in terms of taxpayer fairness. And nothing in this bill changes the appeal process or the protest process. Nothing does that. But it is not right that we would have an inconsistent system where in Dallas County or in Denton County, all the counties around me appraise every year, and our county doesn't, because again, the root problem we're trying to solve for is its direct impact on public school funding, and that is out of the school district's hands, and it's really really out of the appraisal district's hands in a sense, because that is determined by state law. The comptroller is required to do the property value study. If the appraised value is less than what the comptroller says it should be, that data goes to TEA, and TEA has no choice but to claw back state funding. And so then it is our school children that pay the price for these decisions that even the school officials had nothing to do with.
I'll disagree with you. It's always the homeowner that pays the price because we're the ones paying the taxes.
You would disagree there's a shortfall in public schools when they
sir.
failed the property
No.
value study?
You said children pay the price. The homeowners pay the price. Property owners are the ones that pay the price, the actual price. I understand what you're trying to do, but I would tell you that I also think what your appraisal board district is trying to do is laudable in the sense that people don't have to appraise or fight their taxes every single year. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I would vote no on your bill.
Well, Mr. Canales, all right. I think you're misunderstanding the role of the appraisal district board, but all right.
Mr. Morgan, for what purpose?
Does the gentleman yield for questions?
Gentleman yield for questions?
Yes, I do.
Gentleman yields for questions.
So I was listening to your debate earlier and just had a question. So is there anything that prevents the Tarrant County Board of Appraisals to actually, if there was a huge drop-off like in 2008, from reversing their process and dropping appraised values?
I don't know. I
Okay.
haven't looked into that with them.
So therefore, if there was something that happened like that, they could potentially do that and give those homeowners that
Well,
relief that exists.
according to the existing policy, they would not do that. It's every other year, so they'd have to create a brand new policy.
Correct, but since they created this policy, they could create that policy to do the same thing, correct?
Theoretically, I suppose that is possible. I would suggest that it is bad practice to adopt new appraisal policies every time the market changes. There ought to be a consistent policy. I think that's what's best for taxpayers and best for the market.
Well, I will tell you that my constituents are upset that the appraisal value on their homes is, they feel like we're taxing unrealized gains on their homes, and that it continues to go up, and that the fight is unrealistic for them. In fact, I have done this personally in my county. I brought over 1,500 pages to my appraisal board, and they said they reviewed it within 30 seconds, and that's not right. Now that we have some elected board members, they're actually making changes because they are they have constituents that they report to just like you and I do. I appreciate it. Thank you.
And no, I appreciate that. And I would just say, look, there are some good changes being made. In our subcommittee on property tax appraisals, we have passed out a lot of bills that increase power for the taxpayer, increase transparency in the process. This does not affect any of that. I believe there's some amendments.
Following amendment, clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment by DeRazio.
Mr. Drazio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We understand the intent of this bill, and this amendment will make sure that Bexar County will not be impacted. And the amendment is acceptable by the author.
Mr. Speaker,
Garcia, for what purpose?
does the gentleman yield for questions?
Gentleman yield for questions?
I'll yield for questions.
Yields for questions.
Rep. DeRazio, I'm so glad that your amendment is actually focusing on Bexar County because that's why I was at the back mic. I wanted to have a conversation with the author about how this bill would impact Bexar County. Can you just explain to me why we need this carve out for Bexar County?
Well, Bexar County, on the current appraisals members, passed unanimously 9-0 that any time an individual protests their taxes, that tax rate is, that tax appraisal is locked in for 2 years. So their appraisal will not go up for 2 years. There were so many people complaining because we were having to fight those appraisals every year, and they would reappraise at a higher rate. This locks it in. They don't have to protest it. They don't have to go through all the documentation. They would have to normally go through every year.
And how did they come up with the decision to do this biennial program?
Well, it was Bob Bruce was one of the individuals that was elected to the board, and he floated this idea to the rest of the members, and the rest of the members loved it, and that's why we had a 9-0 unanimous vote.
Thank you so much, Rep. DeRazio. I know that a big issue in my district, and I'm sure we all share that same sentiment, is that we have a lot of senior citizens. Our senior citizens are having a very difficult time not only navigating a new world of technology, but it's so overwhelming to get a appraisal at the end of the year, have to figure out how to fight it and how to fight against it, and then by the time they're figuring out how much they actually owe on their taxes, they're already getting hit with another appraisal for the very next year. And this is something that has been an extreme stress and very overwhelming for a lot of the residents, particularly our seniors in our district. And so thank you so much, sir, for bringing this to support Bexar County.
Well, thank you, Rep. Garcia.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I move passage. Oh, sorry, adoption.
DeRazio, Sons of Amendment, it is acceptable to the author. Is there objection? Chair is none. The amendment's adopted. Following amendment, clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment by Lowe.
Mr. Lowe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members,
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Moody, for what purpose?
raise a point of order against further consideration of the Lowe amendment under Rule 11, Section 3, and that it changes the original purpose of the bill.
Bring your point of order down front.